slightly more kind of simplified and fictionalized kind of way, right? So let's take what's going on in this handout. What did you guys pull out of this? I'm not going to give any context for it yet. I just want to know what you were able to do with it, what you were able to get out of it.
Well, one thing that I got is if you're comparing it with Hobbes and everything is that both of them kind of talk about, like, Hobbes basically says, like, where there is no common power, there is no law, no justice, blah, blah, blah. And in this one, it's saying, like if you grind, like, the world down to, like, the finest, but there's no law, no justice, or anything like that, so they're both kind of alike in that aspect.
Okay. So if you, as the character in this dialogue suggests here, right, if you grind down the universe into powder, right, and you don't find in that powder any single atom of justice or mercy or duty, right? What does that suggest about the nature of justice, mercy, and duty, and concepts like that?
That's fictional, like it's not real.
Yeah, that they're not natural, right? That they don't have a real existence. So if they don't have a real existence, what does that mean? Where do they come from? Yeah, people have to make it up, right? So the idea here, yeah, is that justice, duty, and mercy are artificial. And how do we become, how is it saying we come to believe in things like justice, duty, and mercy?
Like when we're little and we believe like little white lies, and so we believe we're much older.
Yeah, so you start out, you get practice on, believing in things like the tooth fairy, right? Everybody knows the tooth fairy isn't real, right? I'm not ruining anything for anyone here. Okay. Yeah, my wife figured out when she was a kid that her grandfather was the tooth fairy because the typewriter that he typed out the tooth fairy letters on, there was something wrong with one of the keys, and she was fiddling with it in the study once, and she said, "Oh, hey, this must be the tooth fairy's typewriter." Like, wait a minute. So she used empirical evidence to deduce that the tooth fairy wasn't real, was in fact her grandfather. But yeah, the idea here being, right? Yeah, so we start believing in things like the tooth fairy, and Santa Claus, right? And then that prepares us to believe in these bigger ideas that are just as unnatural, right? That are also contrary in some ways to our nature. In fact, like what does the text here refer to these ideas as?
Fantasies.
They're fantasies, and what else? Sorry? Pardon?
You're talking about where it's like the fallen angel meets the rising day. Hogfathers?
Okay. Oh no. Okay. So a Hogfather, just in the book that this is taken from, the Hogfather is a figure that's similar to Santa Claus.
Oh.
So yeah. So the Hogfather is like a tooth fairy, right? Basically, one of these kind of, and everybody knows about Santa Claus now too, right? That's again, like I'm not ruining anybody's life here.
No.
Yeah, my
Okay.
dad would come wake me up and let me should be with him.
So I want to kind of direct your attention to this line in the middle here, right? It says, practice, you have to start out learning to believe the little lies. What's the key word in this sentence? Pardon? Okay, little is italicized, right? But what does little modify here? Lies. So let's unpack this word lies here for a second, right? What is a lie?
Something that isn't true.
It's something that isn't true, right? But in order to be lying, like, can you lie by accident?
No.
Yeah, if you're lying by accident, you're just wrong, right? You're just mistaken. So lying is telling a deliberate untruth, right? Right, if I tell you a lie, I know that I'm telling you something that isn't true and I'm doing it intentionally. Do we tend to regard lying, how do we tend to regard lying morally? Yeah, lying is morally wrong, right? It's best to be honest. It's best to tell the truth. And yet, what is this little piece of text here suggesting about the relationship between lying and morality?
Lying and what?
Morality.
You said, what is this suggesting about lying?
It's saying that you need, you basically, it says you're saying humans need fantasies to make life bearable. It's saying, if you lie, it's going to make your life bearable. It's not going to be
Well, let's follow up on this. So the first person in the dialogue says, right, humans need fantasies to make life bearable. And then the second voice says, right, really, as if it were some kind of pink pill. No, humans need fantasy to be human. And also think of the fact that he calls justice, duty, and mercy lies as well, right? So what is the implied relationship here between lying and morality?
That the morals that they have set are a lie.
Yeah, that you can't have morality, right, without lying to yourself on some level, right? If you can't pretend that these things really exist, then you can't behave in a moral fashion, right? So morality, according to this argument here, requires fantasy, requires these kind of constructed ideas. So this is taken from a novel by the British fantasy writer Terry Pratchett. Right, the novel is called Hogfather. And so Pratchett writes satirical fantasy, but it's usually, like most satire, it deals usually with serious issues, right? So, some of his books deal with serious social issues. This particular book deals with the relationship between belief and reality. But the reason I wanted to look at this first, because I think it's making a pretty similar point to some of what Hobbes is saying about human life and the state of nature, right? So let's shift this over to thinking about Hobbes. Were you able to figure out what Hobbes means by the state of nature? What is human life in the state of nature?
War,
Okay.
conflict.
Yeah, war is
Not fighting, physically.
yeah. Yeah, the natural state of human existence, right, is war. We are in a constant state of war and conflict with each other. Why, in the state of nature, are we always at conflict? What essentially does the state of, so this is what life is like in the state of nature, right? It's the state of constant war, right? Well, what does state of nature actually mean?
So the environment, laws, or social structures, one of which human nature exists without.
Right in the introduction there, yes. So yeah, so the state of nature is human life without any laws or rules, right? There's no authority structure to hold you accountable for anything that you do in Hobbes' state of nature, right? And if there's no authority structure to hold you accountable for anything that you do, then what theoretically can you do? Whatever you want, right? Or probably more accurately, whatever you can get away with without someone else stopping you on their own account, right? So let's dive into this and kind of like see how this leads to like how Hobbes' ideas of human capacities lead to conflict. So can I get somebody to start reading on page 82, the first paragraph here? So nature hath made men so equal. And remember too, like when Hobbes says men, he just means human beings. He's writing in a more sexist age.
Nature hath made men so equal. And then, is that faculty?
Faculties, yep.
Faculties of body and mind as that will be found one man sometimes manifested stronger in the body or quicker mind in another. Yet when all of them are put together, the difference between man and man is not so considerable as that one man can thereupon plan to himself any benefit to which other may not pretend as well as he. For as to the strength of the body, the weakest has strength enough to kill the strongest, either by secret machination or by confederacy with others that are in the same danger with themselves.
Okay, so how do all human beings then relate to each other in terms of relative physical strength according to Hobbes? Yeah. In terms of our basic physical capacities to do each other harm, we're basically equal, right? So, say Meredith is physically stronger than I am, right? In a straight up fight, right, if I simply challenge her and we duke it out, she'll beat me, right? But I can always wait till her back is turned and stab her in it, right? I can slip poison into her water, right? The basic idea being here, like, not that I intend any of you harm, but that all human beings have equal capacity to kill or hurt other human beings, right? That the physically weakest have as much capacity to do physical harm as the physically strongest, right? They just usually have to go about it in different ways. So when you talk about, let's say, like you know, secret machination, right? You know, like you have to resort to trickery. You have to resort to stratagems, to use a word from last time, right? To do anything to harm other people, right? Now the other thing that people can do is band together against a common enemy, right? So, say, you know, again, to use Meredith as an example here, I'd say that not only is she the strongest of us, but she also owns a great big plot of land that we all want, and has a great big hidden stick, right? Now, say that Shelby and Carmen and I all want that land, right? But we're afraid of the hidden stick. But if there's 3 of us and 1 of her, right? She can't hit all of us at once. So we can gang up on her, disarm her, and then take her land, right? But then we would have to be willing to cooperate with each other. So through banding together, people who are physically weaker can become as strong as people who are physically stronger, right? Okay, now, in terms of our mental capacities, can I get somebody to start reading the next paragraph, starting with an as to the faculties of the mind?
And as to the faculties of the mind, setting aside the arts grounded upon words, and especially that skill proceeding upon general and
Infallible. Yep.
infallible rules called science, which there we have and by every things, as being not a native faculty, nor with us, nor attained experience. While we look after someone else, I find yet a greater equality amongst men than that of strength. For prudence is but experience, which equal time equally bestows on all men in those things that equally apply themselves unto. That which may perhaps make such equality incredible is but a vain conceit of one's own wisdom, which almost all men think they have in a greater degree in the world, that is, than all men but themselves and a few others whom by fame or for concurring with themselves they improve. For such is the nature of men that howsoever they may acknowledge many others to be more witty or more eloquent or more learned, yet they will arguably their being so wise as themselves. For they see their own good at hand and other men's at a distance, but this proverb rather than men are in that way than others. For there is not ordinarily a greater sign of the equal distribution of anything than that every man is content to good share.
Okay, so how do we rank against each other in terms of our basic mental capacities? Also equal, right? Yep. Once you strip away things like education and experience, right? In terms of our basic faculties of mind, everybody is equal in those regards as well, right? Everyone is just as smart as everyone else. And this is, at least in my experience, more or less, right? Like what we regard as intelligence isn't necessary, isn't something we're born with, right? Isn't what Hobbes would call a native faculty, right? If it's native, right, that means it's something you're born with. Like, I have an easier time understanding a text like this than y'all do. Not because I'm any smarter than you, but because I'm older, I have more education, and my professional life up to this point has been dedicated to interpreting text, right? So a task like this is naturally easier for me because of practice and education. But you have the same capacity to do it that I do. Okay, so we've got physical and mental capacity being more or less equal, right? We generally tend to think of equality as a good thing, right? Yeah, everybody ought to be equal. Great, everyone's equal, wonderful, right? Does Hobbes think that all this equality is a good thing? What does he believe all this equality leads to? Pardon? Yeah, that this actually leads to conflict, right? Because we're all equally able to impose ourselves and our will on other people, right? If we want something that our neighbor has, right, then we have an equal we all have an equal capacity to take it. So can I get somebody to read the next paragraph here for us, starting with, from this equality of ability ariseth equality of hope.
From this equality of ability ariseth equality of hope in the attaining of our ends. And therefore, if any two men desire the same thing, which nevertheless they cannot both enjoy, they both become enemies. And in the way to their end, which is principally their own conservation, and sometimes their delectation only, endeavor to destroy or subdue one another. And from hence it comes to pass that, where an endeavor hath no more to fear than another man's single power, if one plant, sow, build, or possesses a convenient siege, others may probably be expected to come prepared in forces united, to dispossess and deprive him, not only of the fruit of his labor, but also of his life or liberty. And the invader again is in the like danger of another.
So you remember last time we looked at Tawfiq al-Hakim and this notion of the way of the sword, right? As opposed to the way of the law, right? What was the way of the sword? Does anybody remember?
Forcefully getting what you want by killing others.
Yeah, exactly. It's using violence to get your way, right? Yeah, using violence to impose your will, or at least the threat of violence. That's kind of the same thing Hobbes is talking about here, right? That the way of the sword is what rules when we're in the state of nature. The strongest can simply take whatever they want. So if your neighbor can simply take from you what you have, right? What's the point of planting, sowing, or building? Right? If as soon as someone stronger than you comes along, they're just going to take it. And then once that person has taken from you, what do they have to live in fear of?
Take it back.
Yes, you might take it back if they didn't kill you, right? Or someone else might come along and take it from them, right? This is the same thing the Qadi said to the Sultan, right? Is that if you live by the sword, then you're always worried about somebody stronger coming along and applying the same logic to you, right? So can I get somebody to continue here on page 83 from this diffidence of one another? Diffidence in this case means like distrust of others. Right, something that gets in the way of forming relationships or alliances with other people, right? So, and from this diffidence of one another, anybody?
And from this difference of one another, there is no way for any man to secure himself so reasonable as anticipation, that is, by force or wills to master
Wiles. Trickery, yep.
to master the persons of all men he can. So long till he see no other power great enough to evade him, and this is no more than his own conservation. What is our
Requireth.
required and is generally allowed. Also because there be some that taking pleasure in contemplating their own power in the acts of conquest, which they pursue further than their security requires. If others that otherwise would be glad to be at ease within large bounds should not be made to increase their power, they would not be able long time by standing alone on their defense to subsist, and by consequent such augmentation of
Dominion.
over them by necessary to its conservation ought to be allowed.
Okay. So, in the state of nature, as we've more or less established already, right? Like, can we trust our neighbors? No, right? Even if I made that deal with Shelby and Carmen to dispossess Meredith, right? There's nothing stopping us from turning on each other once that goal is accomplished, right? We might be united by a common goal for a short time, but then one of us is going to want sole possession of what we took. And we'll start plotting against each other, right? So you can never trust your neighbors in the state of nature. What's the only way you can feel secure, according to Hobbes, in the state of nature? What do you have to be able to do to feel secure? If there is no law and no authority to overrule everybody.
By force.
Yeah. You have to be able to make yourself unassailable, right? You have to be so strong and so scary that nobody is willing to come after you. And for most people, he argues, like that is either, two birds, like most people really just want to be able to live their lives more or less at peace, right? Not have to worry about their greedy or neighbors. And also, this is really no way to run a society, right? So if we look at the next paragraph here, right, we get some sort of sense of a solution to the problem, right? Again, men have no pleasure, but on the contrary, a great deal of grief in keeping company where there is no power able to overawe them all. For every man looketh that his companion should value him at the same rate that he sets upon himself, and upon all signs of contempt or undervaluing, naturally endeavors as far as he dares, which amongst them that have no common power to keep them in quiet, is far enough to make them destroy each other, to extort a greater value from his condemners by damage, and from others by example. So in the first sentence here, we have the hint of a solution. What is necessary to make people behave, according to Hobbes? Men have no pleasure, but on the contrary, a great deal of grief in keeping company where there is no power able to overawe them all. No, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I thought I had an idea, kind of not like blackmailing them, but having something to hold over them or something like that.
Okay, yeah, there's got to be something
Like
over.
having the upper hand.
Sorry?
I said like having like the upper hand. Like, kind of like, say for instance, like my sister, she'll go do something and I'll be like, well, I did this, so this is more important than yours.
Okay. So, but then you've just got one-upmanship, right? And it's still basically the same problem. So what does he mean here by no power able to overawe them all? What's missing from a society like this?
Not like one person or being like in charge of everyone.
Yeah. What he's talking about here is a government or a king, right? What he's saying is that when there is no set of rules or no authority figure that everybody has to listen to, right? Then everybody just does whatever the fuck they want. And the result is a state of constant war and conflict, right? So there has to be one power able to overawe, to dominate everybody, right? I'm not suggesting, by the way, that this is my own view of the way the world should be, right? I'm just trying to teach Hobbes more or less sympathetically here, right? So let me tell you a little bit about kind of like where Hobbes' ideas come from, like the context that he's writing in. And then some of this might make a little bit more sense to us. So I don't know how many of y'all have any real sense of British history, given past conversations in this class regarding your history teachers and history classes. I'm going to guess not much, right? Okay. So Hobbes is writing in the period immediately after what we call the English Civil War. And this is a civil war that kind of proceeds in 3 waves between 1642 and 1651. So the basic conflict is between the Royalists, also sometimes called Cavaliers, who were supporters of the British King, Charles I. And their enemies, the parliamentarians or Roundheads, are led by Oliver Cromwell. Are any of these names at all familiar to anybody?
I read the text, it's familiar.
Okay. All right. So, the basic conflict here was the right of the king to command the people to do what he wanted, right? Essentially, where the powers of government really lie in British law. So Parliament argued that the king had no authority to make laws without their consent, right? Parliament being the body that was at least theoretically representative of the people and their interests, right? Charles I was a believer in the divine right of kings. Does anybody know what this is, or at least can guess what divine right of kings means?
What rights kings have?
Pardon?
What rights kings have?
Okay, and where does it suggest a king's rights derive from? Do they derive from the people? Nope. If it's divine right, where does it come from? Yeah, that was basically Charles's argument, right? Is that it has been divinely ordained that I become king, that I rule this country. So who are you little bunch of pissant parliamentarians to tell me what I can and can't do, right? So the war was essentially over the limits of royal authority. So, by 1649, Charles is captured and executed. By the parliamentarian forces. And the war is over with and ends with a parliamentarian victory in 1651. And Charles's family is at least temporarily exiled. And for a short period of time, England is ruled as a protectorate by Oliver Cromwell, who takes the title Lord Protector.
So it wasn't a monarchy anymore, it was just like...
Yeah, it was functionally similar to a monarchy or military dictatorship. Cromwell had kind of promised a more democratic regime and didn't really deliver on it. But the basic question of the rights of the king was settled. So going forth, after Charles I, no other British monarch has tried to claim divine right and really takes no role in the legislative process, or it's all been left to Parliament since then. But Hobbes is a royalist sympathizer. And so he believes that deposing and executing the king breaks the contract between the people and their rulers, right? That the king is exercising legitimate authority, and that the people don't necessarily have the right to depose a king, right? That what's going to happen if you get rid of the king, if you get rid of the authority figure, is actually worse. And he argued that the violence of this decade of civil war and civil strife was pretty much evidence of that. So Hobbes is the earliest thinker to formulate what we call a social contract theory. And we talked a little bit about this last time. I think we determined that this was not familiar, right? No one had actually ever heard of this before. Okay, so American government is actually built on the social contract theories of John Locke and the Swiss philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. But Locke and Rousseau argued that the basic purpose of government was to protect the people's rights, right? The people enter into a contract with their governing body to protect their rights and liberties. And if the government fails to do so, then the people have the right to, the people can consider the contract broken and have the right to revolt, right? And replace that government with another one. Hobbes is arguing something similar, but kind of from the other way around, right? That yes, there is a contract between the ruler and the ruled, but most of the responsibility lies with the people to keep the compact and to not take violence, like to not use violent means to assert themselves, right? So essentially what Hobbes is arguing is the people sign over the rights to legal violence to the government. The government gets a monopoly on violence. And as a result, the people then don't have to worry about securing their own property, because theoretically at least the government does that for you, right? And they don't have to worry about fighting off their neighbors. Right? If you no longer have to worry about being invaded constantly, then you can focus your attention on farming or, reading, writing, art, right? Building civilization. So to give us a sense of how important this is to Hobbes, can I get somebody to start reading on page 83? The bottom of the page, you're starting with whatsoever therefore is consequent to a time of war.
Whatsoever there is a consequence to a time of war, where every man is enemy to every man, the same is consequence to the time where men live without other security than what their own strength and their own invention shall furnish them without. In such condition there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain, consequently no portion of the earth, no navigation, nor use of the commodities that may be imported by the sea, no commodities building, no instruments of moving or moving such things as comply with force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, in which is worst of all continual fear, any danger or violent death of the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, foolish, and short.
Okay, so what is Hobbes saying we can't have if we have to spend all our time trying to secure what we have?
Said that there's like no control of the earth, no navigation, no buildings, instruments, moving, moving things that require much force. So like small little things. That's like the only things they can do.
Yeah. So if we think about that, even like broaden out a little bit, right? Can you accomplish any big civilization level stuff if you are constantly worried about defending your property, according to Hobbes? Yeah, you basically can't have civilization if this is how you're living, right? If you're living without laws and without authority, and you always have to worry about looking over your shoulder, there's no place for education, There's no place for any kind of large-scale agriculture. There's no place for large-scale building projects, right? There's no place for trade. The things that make human life more bearable, right, can't exist unless there is some authority holding everything together, right, and forcing people to cooperate. To get a sense of how he thinks this works, if we look at the bottom of page 84 here, right? But though there had never been any time wherein particular men were in a condition of war against each other, yet in all times kings and persons of sovereign authority, because of their independency, are in continual jealousies and in the state and posture of gladiators, having their weapons pointing and their eyes fixed on one another, that is, their forts, garrisons, and guns upon the frontiers of their kingdoms, and continual spies upon their neighbors, which is a posture of war. But because they uphold thereby the industry of their subjects, there does not follow from it that misery which accompanies the liberty of particular men. So if you give all the authority for legitimate violence to a king or to some kind of sovereign body, right, what does that free you up to do? So even if there's no war on, right, the king is going to keep forts along the borders manned, right, is going to keep soldiers at the ready, is going to put spies in neighboring kingdoms, right, is going to take on all that responsibility for security. So you can do what? Yeah, so you can do something fucking useful, right? The basic idea would be like nobody can really accomplish anything meaningful if they're constantly worried about their own security. And again, like this is coming out of a decade of civil war, right? In which, people genuinely did not feel secure, which royal authority really had broken down, right? And, in which, neighbors really did turn against neighbors. So, last thing I want to look at here, there's a paragraph here where Hobbes provides some evidence for his particular arguments, page 84, right? It may seem strange to some man that has not well weighed these things, that nature should thus dissociate and render men apt to invade and destroy one another. And he may, therefore, not trusting to this inference made from the passions, desire perhaps to have the same confirmed by experience. Like, okay, you want some evidence? I'm about to give you some evidence. Let him therefore consider with himself, when taking a journey, he arms himself and seeks to go well accompanied. When going to sleep, he locks his doors. When even in his house, he locks his chests. And this, when he knows there be laws and public officers armed to revenge all injuries shall be done him. What opinion he has of his fellow subjects when he rides armed, of his fellow citizens when he locks his doors, and of his children and servants when he locks his chests. Does he not there as much accuse mankind by his actions as I do by my words? But neither of us accuse man's nature in it. The desires and other passions of man are in themselves no sin. No more are the actions that proceed from those passions till they know a law that forbids them, which till laws be made they cannot know. Nor can any law be made till they have agreed upon the person that shall make it. So, how is he saying we behave even when we know there are laws to protect us?
We're still scared.
Yeah, we still act like we're scared, right? And we still take steps to secure ourselves, right? Going armed and well accompanied on a long journey, right? Making sure our doors are locked at night. You know, putting our valuables away when the cleaners come, things like that, right? So even when we know there are laws to protect us, he's saying we don't trust other people. And so how can we be expected to trust other people when, you know, at all, when there are absolutely no laws to protect us, right? When human nature, all other things being equal, right, encourages us into a state of conflict. Okay. So anybody have any questions about it? I think we're running pretty close to time here. Yeah. Anybody have any questions about any of this stuff? Or about any of the assignments or anything at all? Okay, so we're going to be looking, so remember to read, right, the Malthus piece for next time, right? And remember to submit the vocabulary words, right? If you are not submitting the right, remember that those are kind of, you know, 10 points out of 100 for your grade total, right? So if you don't do any of those and that ends up being a 0, then, you know, the B you thought you were getting becomes a C, right? The C you thought you were getting becomes a B. So even in terms of basic self-interest here, right? Get this done.